I'm absolutely delighted to be able to introduce one of our keynote speakers this morning, Marc Rotenburg. He's going to deliver his address before he jumps on a plane and goes back to the US to appear in court, but you're going to tell us about that, Marc. I have had Marc in mind as an inspirational speaker to you for the last 3 years. I want you to have the opportunity to hear about EPIC's epic work. And at CPDP, at the conference in Brussels, I was able to persuade Marc to join us for this conference because it fit in quite elegantly with your other work, your other international work, and your busy international commitments. So Marc is the president of EPIC, and EPIC is a public interest research center in Washington, D.C. Marc is also a professor of law. He's an author and co-author of many leading texts. He serves on the editorial board of a number of academic journals. He has testified before Congress over 60 times, and he has given public lectures in over 40 countries around the world. Throughout my data protection career, I have had a massive amount of respect and have been an admirer of Marc Rotenburg and the work that he and his team have done to protect our privacy, freedom of expression, and democratic values. EPIC is always on the cutting edge of privacy and technology policy, from algorithmic transparency to facial recognition technology to drones to domestic surveillance to the Internet of Things to social scoring. I know I'm leading out a lot of things that you're going to cover in your speech. But Marc and his team are tireless in privacy campaigns, congressional testimony, advocating for stronger laws, including, as we await, a new US federal law in the US. They are active in appellant advocacy and open government, including recent litigation seeking the final report by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. And also, most recently, EPIC has been fighting for privacy and democracy, which is work very complementary to the ICO's investigation and policy work of late. We need EPIC's voice in this important debate. Marc, you have many friends in this audience. You have many friends in the UK, and we're very keen to hear about EPIC's current docket and what we can expect from the debate and the deliberations in the US. So please, everybody, join me in welcoming Marc to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you for that very gracious and very generous introduction. It's very nice to have the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I wanted to share with you the fact that much of the work that I do today and we do at EPIC was inspired by a trip that I had to Manchester over 25 years ago. Because in fact, in 1993, the annual meeting of the International Conference on Data Protection and Privacy Commissioners was held here in Manchester. And working with a group of NGOs, we organized a side event and launched a protest and made a bit of good noise in a positive fashion, I hope. But I was also so taken and impressed by the work of the privacy commissioners throughout Europe and around the world that I thought there was a need for a more substantial organization in the United States. Because as you may know, we actually don't have a federal level privacy agency. So the following year, in 1994, 25 years ago in fact, we established the Electronic Privacy Information Center, EPIC. We grabbed the domain, epic.org, And we said that we would focus public attention on emerging privacy and civil liberties issues. And being good Americans, recently out of law school, we realized also that we could sue a bunch of people, which turns out to be a whole lot of fun, at least if you're the suer and not the suee. One of our very first cases, in fact, involved the FBI's planned surveillance of the internet program, which they had called Carnivore. I think they need to work a little bit on marketing. But okay, we uncovered documents the very first few months we got started, which revealed that that technique collected far more information than the judicial warrant, which provided the legal authority on which they were operating. And of course, those debates have continued to the current day. Liz mentioned also that I'm regrettably need to leave a little bit early today. The reason is that I'm flying back to Washington to argue tomorrow morning in federal district court for the public release of the final report of the special counsel, Robert Mueller. And that case, which EPIC launched, is part of a larger project that we have concerning democracy and cybersecurity. And we were very concerned about the reports after the 2016 US presidential election that a foreign government had interfered with that democratic process, that the platforms were manipulated, that the information we received had been, was not reliable. Many issues have subsequently been revealed. We have, by the way, I should mention, 2 Freedom of Information Act lawsuits for the president's tax returns, EPIC versus IRS 1 and EPIC versus IRS 2. We joke that if we get those documents, we'll have to hire a Russian translator. But we'll confront that issue when we see the documents. I don't understand Cyrillic myself. In another one of our open government cases against the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which, by the way, is the lead organization in the United States responsible for monitoring groups that are subject to foreign cyber attack, they did not follow the notification procedures in advance of the election when they had knowledge that both the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee had been the targets of cyber attack. And it was actually an EPIC Freedom of Information Act request that obtained that information and led to a subsequent hearing in the Senate. But I'm here today actually to talk to you about another recent campaign that I'm very excited about because it produces buttons and banners and a whole lot of cool campaign material, which is why I wanted to have the opportunity to do this presentation. This is a protest that we set up just a couple of weeks ago in front of the U.S. Federal Trade Commission. And you may not capture quite the full imagery here. We're on Pennsylvania Avenue, just a few blocks from the United States Capitol. That's some of the EPIC staff members holding up our banner that says #Enforce the Order, FTC. We're standing, by the way, in front of the museum, which celebrates the First Amendment in the United States. And you can see in the background actually the words of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof, abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievance. We have right now a very big grievance in the United States, and that is that our Federal Trade Commission, with legal authority that we helped establish, has failed to act against Facebook for its numerous privacy violations going back more than 8 years. That's what we're going to talk about. Now, beginning in about 2007, EPIC, my organization, focused on emerging privacy and civil liberties issues, became concerned about a small internet company known as Facebook. Let me say, by the way, that Facebook in those days was kind of cool because it did give you the ability to share information with others, and it did give you the ability to limit who you chose to share that information with. The company had explicit, clear privacy settings. These photos are kind of cool, a little embarrassing. I think maybe just me and my college roommates get to see those. This event that we're organizing in Washington next week, I want a lot of people to come down for that. I'm quite happy to make that public. It's not really private at all. Let's make the setting for that event announcement public. And then there are certain things that maybe I only want my friends to see because I'm controlling who my friends are through the Facebook interface, and they've given me that option. And I have these settings, and I make these choices, and I understand them, and I rely on them. That was Facebook in 2007. And then things started to change. Facebook developed new business relations. And they said, well, you know, some of that information actually might be useful to some of our business partners because it appears that some of the people who are using our service are, you know, thinking of buying a television maybe. And this company wants to advertise with us, and here's someone who's posted on their news feed that, you know, they just were thinking of getting a TV. Maybe there's some way we could make that information available. Facebook was making changes, and we were objecting. And we were focusing specifically on the terms of service which limited explicitly who Facebook could give data to. And remarkably, on the internet, on the Facebook platform, users were coming together and objecting to these practices. Now, I have to say, I took quite a lot of pride in that. I didn't lead it. I did lead, I think, the first internet petition back in 1994 to stop the Clipper chip to give NSA surveillance authority. We got 50,000 people on that. By the way, in 1994, that was a lot of people. That was like half the internet. But the young folks come along. In 2008, they launch a petition called Facebook Users Against the New Terms of Service. And they object to the changes that Facebook is making. I bring the Chief Privacy Officer, Chris Kelly, to my class at Georgetown Law. He has a negotiation with a woman in Norway who organized the campaign, and he says, we're going to do a better job in the spring of 2009. We're going to give users the ability on Facebook to vote on changes in our policy. It's a pretty good class discussion. The next day, USA Today had a big article, Facebook to allow for democratic participation. In the weeks that followed, Mark Zuckerberg committed. He committed to user participation in future changes in Facebook's policy. And we were super excited. We thought, boy, this is the democratization of the internet. This is the use of an online platform for positive political purpose. Someone get me an application for a Nobel Prize. Well, the story didn't turn out quite so well. Over the course of 2009, Facebook backed off its commitments, and we decided to go to the Federal Trade Commission, as we had in the past, successfully, by the way, involving Microsoft, involving ChoicePoint, at the time, by the way, the biggest legal judgment against the data broker ChoicePoint. And we said to the FTC, Facebook has engaged in unfair and deceptive trade practices. You have the authority to issue a consent order and to prevent them from doing it again in the future. We then spent 2 years lobbying the FTC. They described this story as if they did all the work. We did all the work. Our first complaint was 30 pages, our second complaint was 20 pages, and then we spent time before Congress saying why we thought the FTC needed to act. But in 2011, they did. And they put out this press release, very important press release. Facebook settles FTC charges that it deceived consumers by failing to keep privacy promises. That was by the way, the complaint from Epic that originated it. All of this material, by the way, is available online. I think if you look at Epic, In-Ray, Facebook, you'll find all these pleadings. This is what the FTC said back in 2011. Facebook is barred from making misrepresentations. Facebook is required to obtain consumers' affirmative express consent. Facebook is required to prevent anyone from accessing users' material in certain circumstances, required to establish. This is not like parody, okay? I read these words today and you think, oh, that's like from one of those online news groups like The Onion or something. No, these are real words from a real document. Facebook is required to establish and maintain a comprehensive privacy program designed to address privacy risks associated with the development and management of new existing products and services. And then there was an elaborate auditing process that was created, and yes, we will take some credit. We initiated the complaints. We worked with many privacy organizations and consumer groups, and we spent 2 years to obtain this judgment. March 2018, post-WhatsApp acquisition, post the adoption without user consent of facial recognition, post-presidential election, post-Brexit vote, the FTC has not issued a single finding against Facebook. But they think maybe, perhaps, possibly, maybe a little bit, they should take another look. Maybe, if there's some time. If they're not in the midst of holding one of the 12 seminars and workshops that they've been busily organizing over the past year. March 26th, they put out an announcement. The FTC is firmly and fully committed to using all of its tools to protect the privacy of consumers. Wonderful statement. And we say, okay, very good. We're going to give you a clock. We're going to give you 1 year, March 26, 2019, to make meaningful your commitment to pursue that investigation. So we have a press release on Capitol Hill with consumer advocates. That's our banner, Enforce the Order. We're literally across the street from the US Supreme Court. We publish materials. We remind people that the FTC had reopened the investigation. We cited numerous violations of the consent order, and yes, we did mention Cambridge Analytica, but for us there were many other issues: marketing to children, ignoring privacy settings, tracking users, gathering health data, and facial recognition. We pointed out in our campaign, and I think this is important, by the way, to understand, particularly in the US where things are so polarized, that there is, in fact, bipartisan support, Democrats and Republicans, for stronger privacy protections for Americans and for enforcement by the FTC. So we had a leading Democratic senator, Senator Blumenthal, said the consent order had been violated. We had a leading Republican senator, Senator Hawley, said the consent order had been violated. Representative Cicilline, someone who you may hear more about in the days ahead, is also important. He's actually not on one of the committees that typically is concerned with privacy or data protection. He chairs the committee that's concerned with antitrust and competition. And for those who think that the United States keeps data protection and antitrust in two separate lanes, I can tell you this morning that's about to change. That's about to change because Representative Cicilline sees the two as integrally intertwined. We had also the former chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, a Republican, Professor Kovacic, said violation. Former chief technology officer, a Democrat, Ashkan Soltani, a violation, and the internet policy expert, Tim Wu. Now, there was in January a report from the Washington Post that Facebook and the FTC were on the verge of a settlement. And of course, this seemed to us like very good news. But the focus was solely on the amount of the fine. And people said, well, maybe it'll be 500 million, maybe it'll be $1 billion, maybe those numbers aren't large enough for a company of that size and that impact. We began a very interesting conversation among the consumer advocacy groups in Washington, which was, what is the appropriate remedy for the numerous violations of privacy that the company has engaged in? And so we wrote to the Federal Trade Commission, and we said, we don't think this is just about the size of the fine. And in fact, there's a real concern that a substantial fine could impose greater pressure on Facebook to extract commercial value from the data of its users. We wanted some structural reforms. We wanted ongoing obligations to protect privacy. Civil rights issues have been raised about the company. We wanted reforms in hiring and management practices to ensure that a company that seeks to connect the world actually understands the world and allows the members of the world to participate in the operation of the company. We also called for an independent director on the board of directors. And critically, we said that because of violations of representations that were made regarding the acquisition of WhatsApp and Instagram, that the FTC should require Facebook to divest of both WhatsApp and Instagram. And as many of you may know, actually, the company is moving very quickly to try to integrate Messenger, WhatsApp, and Instagram precisely to prevent regulators from preventing that dominance they're seeking. Well, Americans want stronger privacy. We certainly think that's true. We pointed to the FTC's failure to act. We set that March 26th deadline. It turned out to be a good date for us because the FTC was gathering in Washington many privacy officials from around the world, and we thought, oh, that's a wonderful time to have a protest. So as they were doing their indoor conference, we were circulating materials like this. And we even obtained, first time I've done this, it's surprising actually, we probably should have done it earlier, an official permit, an official public gathering permit to stand in front of the Federal Trade Commission. And you can see it's very official. The purpose: protest outside of the Federal Trade Commission to urge the FTC to enforce the 2011 consent order against Facebook. Probably will frame that at some point. And by the way, the people at the Park Service really liked us because most protests that take place in Washington are crazy affairs and people are breaking stuff and throwing beer bottles. We were very polite. They came down, they helped us set up the tables, they'd welcome us back. So we may do another protest in the near future. They wanted us back. And there's our table, enforce the order. We're giving out materials. I left some materials with the ICO staff, buttons and stickers. You may see I'm wearing one now. I don't know why everyone is so focused on digital protest. I think this is so much more fun, but this is something else we're a little bit proud of. In fact, I think if this works properly, if you all open up your phones and look for a local Wi-Fi network to connect with, you'll see the answer to the problem that we confronted, which was that the FTC would actually not let us in the building with our materials. I think that's a violation of the First Amendment, but that's a separate complaint. We'll get to that one. So we thought, how do we communicate our message to the people inside the building at the FTC workshop if we can't bring in our materials? And we said, maybe we can create a public Wi-Fi network with a network ID, hashtag enforce the order, so that when the commissioners and their staff and everybody else are trying to connect to the network, they'll pick up on our campaign theme. Does anyone see it? Are you able to find it? A few hands maybe? Yes? Yeah. A few people. So there you go. That's a campaign tactic for future events, and very inexpensive. All right, a little bit of data. I've gone on and on about the politics and the protests, but let me tell you, there's plenty of data in support of what we're trying to make happen. So, my first chart shows the number of enforcement actions taken by the FTC against Facebook between the time the consent order was announced in 2011 and the present day. Any guesses? Excellent, you're listening. Thank you so much. Now, as I said, we're a little bit clever at Epic, and we don't just take on a campaign in a single level. We try to do things in multi-dimensions. And it occurred to me that there would be records at the Federal Trade Commission of how many complaints consumers had filed regarding Facebook. And I thought maybe we should submit a Freedom of Information Act request to the FTC and find out the number of complaints they've received regarding Facebook since 2011. Now, I didn't anticipate that people submitting complaints to the FTC would do something like the 30-page complaint that we submitted, but I thought there would be at least a few people expressing concern, and likely it would take a bit of time to put those together. So we wrote to the FTC and said, how many complaints have you received? So it's not just Epic, okay? It's not just like a few privacy people in the US who've gone to the FTC and said there are problems with Facebook. But if that number isn't sufficiently alarming to you, let me show you a few other numbers which alarmed me even more so. We then asked the FTC to break down the complaints year by year. All right? Now, if you're in the business of selling complaint stock, this is a really good chart for you. You've got a significant up curve. And that 2019, by the way, this is only a few months into the year. So, as I said, if you're investing in Facebook complaints, don't worry, there's still time. Do you see the slope of the chart? Do you see the growing public awareness in the United States of the risk, the ongoing risk, the risk that results from the absence of enforcement, the lack of oversight by the Federal Trade Commission, to people who simply want to make use, reliable, trustworthy use of new internet services. That's what this chart shows. Now, if you think things are going to get better, if you're somehow, I don't know, see that 2019 indicator and say, well, that data point looks favorable. As I was putting together the presentation, I did a little search. It was something like, Facebook privacy problem. Almost the first item that came up, this is just a couple days ago. I didn't even bother to look this morning. They didn't give me enough time. Another Facebook fiasco, over 540 million user records reportedly exposed on public database. That's April 3rd, 2019. Almost 8 years since the consent order was announced, and more than a year since the FTC said it would reopen the investigation. So I'm going to close with just a few words. I want to begin simply by saying the obvious. In our modern age, privacy protection is enormously important. Our lives, our companies, our governments depend on the protection of personal data to continue to operate, to function. it's very difficult to imagine a world in which data protection did not exist. But it is equally clear that the enforcement of this right is absolutely critical because the threats have become more complex. When I got started, I was concerned about how big businesses might use personal data. I was concerned about how intelligence agencies might use personal data. But when I testified recently before the United States Senate after the Equifax breach, I had to talk about the threat of foreign adversaries who had actually become less interested in the business plans of US companies and more interested in the personal data of US consumers. So the types of cyber attacks that we confront today in the US are from foreign actors seeking the personal data stored by our companies. You're very fortunate, I think, to have a dedicated privacy commissioner such as Liz Denham. You know, I've been in this field for a long time, and I've worked with many, many privacy officials. It's a great group of people, but I'll tell you, Liz stands out, and she stands out because of her dedication, because of the extraordinary people that she brings to work for her, and because of her commitment to ensure that the rights that have been established to safeguard data are enforced. And I think what she said to you this morning about the importance of accountability is the common theme that binds us all together. Because you see, we know the importance of protection. We know the threats. And we create these legal authorities to safeguard ourselves. But if we fail to enforce those authorities, if we fail to do the diligence that is required, then I think we only have ourselves to blame. Well, not quite. At least in the US, I think we can also blame the Federal Trade Commission. So I will continue to blame them. I will continue to sue them until they do the job they're supposed to do. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you this morning.